Now, joining us live on this broadcast from Washington, D.C. is Richard Rossow, the U.S.-India policy expert and a senior advisor. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on WION at this hour. My first question to you, this happens to be a highly anticipated meeting between the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the U.S. President Joe Biden. Tell us a little bit more about what you think will be on the agenda, especially with respect to the future of India-U.S. ties.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I think that both leaders are coming to the table with really important agenda items. I think Prime Minister Modi, he certainly wants to see about cooperation and for the United States to be a little bit more expansive in terms of offering not just vaccines for world supply, but also a lot of the materials that India needs for its own production. India also wants to see what kind of workaround is going to be possible between the two countries to avoid this dreaded sanctions program, the CAATSA sanctions that might be applied to India for continuing buying Russian-made defense equipment, notably the S-400 missile system. The U.S. agenda, a lot of it is going to be driven by the upcoming climate change meetings that are happening. It's obviously a tier one policy initiative on foreign policy for the Biden administration. India's choices on climate change are going to be crucial for what happens with the world and Afghanistan. So I think both sides are going to want to share notes on Afghanistan. India will press the United States not to use this as an opening to try to rebuild warmer ties with Pakistan. They want to make sure that these things are maintained in separate buckets, and that Pakistan doesn't have a stronger hand, I think, in trying to influence American defense policy towards India. So Afghanistan, climate, potential sanctions, defense cooperation, a lot of big issues on the table for both sides.
Right. Now, Richard, my second question for you, there will also be the first in-person Quad Summit, which, of course, has a lot of expectations and there's a lot of anticipation towards this meeting as well. This comes after the announcement of the controversial AUKUS Pact. Tell us a little bit about the significance of the Quad in light of the announcement of the AUKUS Pact as well.
Well, I think that the two are proceeding on separate tracks. And I think, you may have some, if we look back at this, some point in the future, there may be some tangential differences. France may make a bigger play for India to buy defense equipment since they just launched a big deal. But I think these two will be maintained on separate tracks. The United States, with such a large military and diplomatic corps, we can manage two emerging relationships kind of simultaneously. Australia is the one where, just because it's a little bit smaller country, committing resources to two big initiatives that are shaping at the same time may be a little bit more tricky, but they've always been able to punch above their weight. So I suspect the two will move on separate tracks. The question I think that'll come up in Quad, maybe not this time, but in the future, there are a growing number of countries, including the UK, including France and others, that have shown some level of interest in having some engagement with the Quad. But I think the two will broadly be engaged on very different and diverse tracks. The Quad Summit itself is a big signaling event. For the first time, the leaders are meeting in person. So the fact that they're actually doing this and carving out time and schedules is going to be a big signaling event for other countries in the region, notably China. A lot of the work for the Quad now is going to be done under these working groups. So you may not have as many big announcements in the meetings because the work happens in between. But there still are some gaps, I'd say, in terms of what the Quad's work plan is. I think most importantly, I hope that they're able to come to agreement on some work plan to look at jointly cooperating in regional infrastructure. Because as you know, across South Asia and the Indian Ocean region, that's where China's main thrust has been on development of ports and other areas, which could potentially be used for military activities later on. So two organizations moving on separate tracks. I think we've all got the space and capacity to do that simultaneously, and good agenda and very powerful signaling the fact the leaders have chosen to do this.
Right, Richard, my final question for you. Let's talk business. As we know, the Indian Prime Minister just sat down with some of the biggest CEOs in the world, American CEOs to be specific. Tell us a little bit about what you think was on the agenda. We know the Indian Prime Minister focused on the digital and IT space, as well as meeting with some of the biggest chip makers, given the supply chain crisis that we are currently seeing.
Yeah, I think this concept about China's ability to dominate trade flows in certain products, we've seen that in COVID, with COVID materials directly that both of our countries use for vaccine production. We've seen China threaten and actually use trade measures against Australia, withholding items that they would buy from Australia or sell to Australia, and then the chip shortage. So I think diversifying supply chains is critical, and that plays very well into Prime Minister Modi's agenda on this Make in India campaign. The incredible improvements India has made on ease of doing business, trying to press Indian states to do a little bit better. India is a massive consumer market, so a lot of these companies are going to make investments, at least for the domestic market. But the question is, can Prime Minister Modi convince these companies to leverage India as a manufacturing source for global production? Be interested to see, in the years ahead on how well these conversations went, because technology companies are looking for a wider supply base. India is certainly trying to be that next best country in line to try to attract some of that investment. So a great target group, I think, for the Prime Minister to engage on the trip.
Richard, thank you so much for all your insights and perspectives, and thank you for joining us on WION at this hour. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.